At his wedding, my son publicly confessed, "I have always hated our last name. I am ashamed to be his son." Verifone laughed as he shamed our family. But he did not know that name came from millionaires. That same week I inherited $20 million, and he would learn that the price of a new name was everything he ever wanted. If you have ever felt the stinging betrayal of your own flesh and blood, hit like and subscribe and tell me in the comments where you are watching from, because this story of justice is for you. The microphone feedback screeched through the grand ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton in Chicago, slicing through the polite chatter of 300 wealthy guests, like a rusty knife cutting through silk. My son Brandon stood on the elevated stage, swaying slightly, the stem of a crystal champagne flute pinched dangerously tight between his fingers. His face was flushed a deep crimson, not just from the expensive vintage wine he had been consuming for the last hour, but from the intoxicating rush of adrenaline that comes from being the center of attention. Beside him stood Vanessa, his new bride, looking like a porcelain doll, wrapped in $10,000 of white lace and pretension. She watched him with a look of predatory adoration, her eyes gleaming under the chandeliers that cost more than the house I had lived in for 40 years. I sat at table 42, the table furthest from the stage, tucked away near the swinging kitchen doors, where the waiters rushed in and out with trays of filet mignon and lobster. I was invisible in the shadows, which was exactly where Vanessa had wanted me. I adjusted the collar of my suit. It was a charcoal gray suit I had bought 20 years ago for my wife's funeral. The fabric was worn shiny at the elbows, and the style was outdated by 2 decades, but it was clean. I had pressed it myself that morning in my small kitchen, making sure every crease was sharp. My hands rested on the white tablecloth. They were rough hands, calloused and permanently stained with the faint chemical smell of industrial cleaners. These were the hands of a janitor. These were the hands that had scrubbed toilets and mopped hallways at St. Jude's Private Academy for 12 years, just so Brandon could attend that school tuition-free. These were the hands that had fixed boilers in the freezing Chicago winters, so my son would never know what it felt like to shiver in his sleep. Brandon tapped the microphone again, demanding silence. The room hushed. He looked out over the sea of faces, the politicians, the real estate tycoons, the friends of Vanessa's wealthy parents. He did not look at me. Not once. "Ladies and gentlemen," Brandon boomed, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "Thank you for being here to witness the happiest day of my life. But today is not just about a wedding. Today is about a transformation." He took a sip of champagne and a few guests chuckled nervously. Vanessa squeezed his arm, whispering something that looked like encouragement. "You all know my story." Brandon continued, his tone shifting into a performative sadness that made my stomach turn. "I did not come from this world. I did not grow up with silver spoons and summer homes in the Hamptons. I grew up in a shack on the South Side. I grew up smelling of bleach and floor wax because my father—" He paused, and the spotlight operator seemed to know exactly what to do. The beam of light swung across the room, searching through the darkness until it landed on me. I blinked, blinded by the sudden glare. I could feel 300 pairs of eyes burning into me, dissecting my old suit, my gray hair, my rough hands. "My father is a good man in his own simple way," Brandon said, his voice dripping with condescension. "He is a janitor, a maintenance man. He fixes things that break. But growing up, the name Blackwood was a heavy chain around my neck. It was a name that smelled of poverty. It was a name that meant I had to work twice as hard to get half as far as any of you. It was a name that closed doors before I could even knock." The crowd murmured. I saw a woman at the next table cover her mouth to hide a smile. I sat frozen, my spine rigid against the chair. I wanted to stand up. I wanted to shout that the name Blackwood was honorable, that it was the name of a man who chose love over greed, that I had saved him from a legacy of blood and ruthlessness that he knew nothing about. But I remained seated. I took a sip of water, my throat feeling like it was filled with sand. "So today," Brandon announced, raising his glass high, I am making a choice. I am choosing my future over my past. I am choosing dignity over shame. From this moment forward, I am legally abandoning the name Blackwood. I am taking my wife's name. I am now Brandon Sinclair. The room erupted. It was not a gasp of shock. It was a roar of applause and laughter. They were cheering for him. They were cheering for a son who was publicly executing his father's identity. Vanessa clapped the loudest, kissing him on the cheek, as if he had just won a war. Goodbye to the dirt. Brandon shouted over the applause, looking directly at me for the first time. Goodbye to the struggle. Goodbye, Blackwood. Hello, Sinclair. The laughter of the crowd felt physical, like stones being thrown at me. I looked at my son, the boy I had taught to ride a bike, the boy I had held when he cried over a broken toy, the boy I had emptied my retirement fund for so he could have this wedding. He was looking at me with triumph. He wasn't just changing his name. He was erasing me. He was telling the world that my existence, my sacrifice, my entire life was a mistake he needed to correct. I looked down at the table. Beside my water glass sat a thick, cream-colored envelope. Inside was a check for $5,000. It was everything I had left in the world. It was the money I had saved to fix the leaking roof of my house. It was the money for my medicine. I had withdrawn it all yesterday, thinking that my son deserved a start in life that I never had. I had planned to give it to him quietly during the reception, a final act of a father launching his son into the world. Now the envelope looked ridiculous. $5,000. To Brandon Sinclair, standing up there in his $3,000 tuxedo, $5,000 was a joke. It was tip money. It was an insult. I did not stand up and make a scene. I did not throw a glass. I did not scream. I simply picked up my glass of water and finished it. The cool liquid did nothing to quench the fire in my chest, but it gave me a moment to compose myself. I stood up slowly. My knees creaked, a reminder of 40 years of manual labor. The spotlight had moved away back to the happy couple, but a few people at the nearby tables watched me. They looked at me with pity. That was worse than the mockery. I did not want their pity. I placed the envelope in the center of the table. I did not take it back. A gift given is a gift given even if the recipient is unworthy. I smoothed the tablecloth one last time, a habit from decades of cleaning up after others. Then I turned my back on the stage. I turned my back on Brandon Sinclair. I walked toward the exit, my steps silent on the plush carpet. Behind me, I heard the DJ announce the first dance. The song was My Way. The irony was so thick I could taste it. I pushed open the heavy double doors of the ballroom and stepped out into the lobby. The sudden silence was jarring. The air here was cool and smelled of lilies and expensive perfume. I walked past the marble front desk where the concierge was busy typing on a computer. I caught my reflection in a large, gilt-framed mirror. I saw an old man. I saw a man with white hair and a face carved with deep lines of exhaustion. But I also saw something else. I saw the eyes of Augustus Blackwood. Brandon thought the name Blackwood meant poverty. He was a fool. He did not know that 50 years ago the name Blackwood meant steel. It meant railroads. It meant a mining empire that controlled half the iron in the Midwest. He did not know that I was the second son of Titus Blackwood Sr., a man so cruel he made his workers endure unsafe conditions just to save a few cents on the dollar. He did not know that when I was 20 years old, I met Beatrice. Beatrice was a waitress. She was poor. She was kind. She was everything the Blackwood family hated. My father gave me an ultimatum: leave her or leave the family. He thought he could buy my obedience. He thought the threat of poverty would bring me to my heel. He was wrong. I walked away from a fortune that day. I walked away with nothing but the clothes on my back and the woman I loved. I became a janitor. I became Gus. I buried Augustus Blackwood, because I wanted my children to be raised with love, not with the cold, hard steel of greed. And now my son had spit on that sacrifice. I walked through the revolving doors and out into the Chicago night. The wind off the lake was biting, cutting through the thin fabric of my old suit. I did not hail a taxi. I could not afford one, not after leaving that envelope on the table. I walked to the bus stop 3 blocks away. As I waited for the number 22 bus, the city lights blurring in the distance, I realized that I had failed. I had tried to protect Brandon from the corruption of wealth, but I had failed to protect him from the corruption of shame. He was ashamed of me, and in his shame he had become exactly the kind of man I had spent 50 years trying not to be. The bus ride home took an hour. The bus was empty except for a nurse coming off a double shift and a teenager listening to music through headphones. I sat by the window watching the city change. The towering glass skyscrapers of downtown gave way to the brick walk-ups of the north side, which gave way to the small-sided houses of the outer suburbs. The streets became darker. The cars became older. This was my world. The world Brandon despised. I got off at the corner of Elm and Pine. My house was the third one on the left. It was a small wooden bungalow built in the 50s. The white paint was peeling in long strips, revealing the gray wood underneath. The porch sagged on the left side. The gutters were full of leaves. To anyone else, it was a teardown. To me, it was the only castle I had ever known. I walked up the driveway, stepping over the cracks in the concrete that I had patched a dozen times. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The air was stale and cold. I had turned the heat down to save money before I left for the wedding. I turned on the lamp in the living room. The yellow light illuminated the worn floral sofa, the coffee table with the ring stains, and the small television set that still had an antenna. I sat down in my armchair, the leather cracked and molded to the shape of my body over the years. I did not take off my suit jacket. I felt cold, a deep bone-chilling cold that had nothing to do with the temperature. On the mantelpiece above the fake fireplace sat a framed photograph. It was Beatrice. She was laughing, her head thrown back, her eyes sparkling. She had died 10 years ago from cancer. We had spent our life savings on her treatment, but it wasn't enough. We had died poor, but we had died in love. I looked at her picture, and for the first time that night, my composure cracked. I failed B. I whispered to the empty room. My voice sounded raspy and weak. I thought I was teaching him to be humble. I thought I was teaching him that character matters more than a checkbook. But he hates us, Bay. He hates this house. He hates me. He hates the name we gave him. I closed my eyes and leaned my head back. I could still hear the laughter from the ballroom. I could still see the sneer on Vanessa's face. I realized then that my son was gone. The boy I raised had been consumed by the ambition to be something he was not. He had traded his soul for a last name that sounded like money. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my wallet. It was empty. The check was gone. The bank account was empty. I had nothing. I was 70 years old, alone and destitute. The phone on the side table rang. The shrill, mechanical sound made me jump. I looked at the caller ID. It was Brandon. He was probably calling to ask why I left, or more likely to ask if I had left a gift before I walked out. I watched the phone ring. Once, twice, 3 times. I did not answer. There was nothing left to say. I let it ring until it stopped, and the silence of the house rushed back in louder than before. I sat there in the dark for a long time. I thought about the irony of it all. I had spent my life running from being a Blackwood, only for my son to run toward being a Sinclair. We were both running from ourselves. But the universe has a strange sense of humor, a twisted, cruel sense of humor. I did not know it then, sitting in my cold living room with a broken heart, but the wheels of fate were already turning. Across town in a law office that smelled of mahogany and old money, a fax machine was printing a death certificate. A death certificate that belonged to Titus Blackwood, Jr., my estranged brother. He had died that morning. He had no children. He had no wife. He had no one. Except me. I did not know that while my son was on stage mocking my poverty, I had technically become the wealthiest man in the room. I did not know that the name he had just thrown away like garbage was about to become the key to a $20 million vault. I stood up and walked to the kitchen to make a cup of tea. The faucet dripped. Drip, drip, drip. It was the only sound in the world. I stared at the water swirling down the drain. I had a feeling that the quiet was about to end. I had a feeling that the storm was just beginning, and I was right. 3 days later, the wolves came to my door. They did not come to apologize. They came to feed. And when they arrived, I would have to decide if I was still Gus, the gentle janitor, or if it was time to let Augustus Blackwood wake up from his 50-year slumber. The price of a name was about to go up. Way up. 3 days of silence followed the wedding. 3 days where the only thing I heard was the humming of my old refrigerator and the creaking of the floorboards in the hallway. I spent those 72 hours staring at the walls trying to convince myself that my departure from the Ritz-Carlton had been a fever dream. I tried to tell myself that my son had not actually stood on a stage and disowned his lineage for applause. I tried to believe that he would call, that he would drive up my cracked driveway with his head hung low, asking for forgiveness. I was a fool. I was sitting at my small kitchen table eating a bowl of canned tomato soup and a slice of stale bread when the illusion shattered. I did not hear a car pull up. I heard the screech of tires on pavement, the aggressive roar of an engine being cut, and then the sound of a heavy car door slamming shut. It sounded like an invasion. Before I could even stand up, the front door flew open. It hit the wall with a violence that shook the framed photo of Beatrice on the mantel. Brandon marched in. He was still wearing the expensive Italian loafers he had worn at the rehearsal dinner, but they were scuffed now. His face was a mask of fury, his eyes bloodshot and wild. Behind him trailed Vanessa. She was dragging a Louis Vuitton suitcase that looked heavy enough to crush a man. Her face was twisted into a sneer of absolute disgust as she stepped onto my frayed carpet. She held a handkerchief to her nose as if the very air in my home was toxic. They were supposed to be in the Maldives. They were supposed to be sipping cocktails in an overwater bungalow, celebrating their new life as the golden couple of Chicago high society. Instead, they were standing in my living room looking like cornered animals. Dad Brandon barked, bypassing any greeting. "We have a problem." I stood up slowly, wiping my mouth with a paper napkin. I looked at my son. I did not see the boy I raised. I saw a stranger in a designer shirt that was wrinkled and stained with sweat. "You are back early," I said, my voice calm. It was the calm of a man who has nothing left to lose. "Don't play dumb with me, old man," Brandon snapped. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled cream-colored envelope. It was the envelope I had left on table 42. The envelope containing my life savings, $5,000. He threw it at me. It hit my chest and fell to the floor, landing in the dust near my boots. "Is this a joke?" Brandon shouted, his voice cracking. $5,000, that is what you left us. That is your grand contribution to our future." I looked down at the envelope. To me, it represented years of skipping meals, years of patching my own clothes, years of fixing things instead of replacing them. To him, it was an insult. "It was all I had, Brandon," I said quietly. "It was every penny." "It is chump change," Vanessa hissed from the doorway. She kicked the envelope with her pointed heel. "Do you know what happened to us? Do you have any idea the humiliation we just endured?" She stepped forward, her eyes blazing. "We got to the airport. We tried to check into the first-class lounge. Declined. We tried to pay for the upgrade. Declined. We called the hotel in the Maldives to confirm the transfer. They told us the credit card on file had been rejected for insufficient funds. She looked at Brandon with pure venom, then turned back to me. Your son told me he had this handled. He told me the Blackwood name, or whatever he calls himself now, meant something. But apparently, he is just as broke as you are. I looked at Brandon. He refused to meet my eyes. I knew what he had done. He had maxed out every card he had to pay for the engagement ring, the deposit on the venue, the suit, the lifestyle he could not afford. He had gambled everything on the hope that the wedding gifts would cover the debt, or perhaps he thought marrying a Sinclair would magically erase his balance sheet. We need money, Gus Brandon said, his voice dropping the pretense of respect. He called me Gus, not Dad. Gus, we need cash. Now. My cards are frozen. Vanessa's parents are furious because I put the catering bill on their account without asking. They have cut us off until we pay them back. And what do you expect me to do? I asked. I pointed to the envelope on the floor. That is it. That is the well. It is dry. Brandon looked around the room. His eyes darted from the worn sofa to the antique radio, dismissing everything as trash. Then his gaze settled on the window looking out at the overgrown backyard. The land, he muttered. What? I asked. The land, Dad, he said, his voice gaining strength. The house is garbage. It's a teardown. But the lot, we are in the suburbs. Developers are buying up these lots for townhouses. This dirt is worth something. My heart went cold. This house was not garbage. This house was where I brought Beatrice when we were 21. This house was where we painted the nursery yellow. This house was where I held her hand as she took her last breath. Every scratch in the floorboards was a memory. Every crack in the ceiling was a story. You want me to sell my home? I asked, my voice trembling slightly. It is not a home. It is a shack, Vanessa interjected, walking over to stand beside Brandon. She placed a hand on his shoulder, not in support, but in command. Sell it. It is the only asset you have. If we sell it quickly to a cash buyer, we can get enough to pay off the wedding debt and put a deposit down on the apartment in Manhattan. Manhattan, I asked. You are moving to New York. Brandon nodded, a desperate gleam in his eyes. I can't stay here. Not after the credit card thing. Everyone in Chicago will know. I need a fresh start. Vanessa has connections in the city. We need that apartment, Gus. It is the only way to fix this. And where am I supposed to go? I asked. If you sell this house, where do I live? Brandon reached into his back pocket. He pulled out a glossy trifold brochure. He must have picked it up on the way here. He tossed it onto the kitchen table. Sunny Meadows, he said. I looked at the brochure. It was a state-funded nursing facility 3 towns over. I knew the place. It was a warehouse for the forgotten. It was where people went to stare at a television until they died. It smelled of industrial disinfectant and boiled cabbage. It was a place where dignity went to die. It is better for you, Brandon said, his voice taking on a rehearsed, patronizing tone. You are getting too old to manage this place. The gutters, the lawn, the heating bills. It is too much. At Sunny Meadows you will have meals. You will have people your own age. You will be safe. Safe, I repeated. You want to put me in a state home so you can buy a condo in Manhattan. It is a trade-off, Vanessa said, checking her manicure. You get care, we get a future. It is the least you can do after embarrassing us with that envelope. She looked at me with eyes devoid of any humanity. You are a burden, Gus. You have always been a burden to Brandon. He has been carrying the weight of your mediocrity his whole life. This is your chance to finally be useful. I looked at my son. I waited for him to defend me. I waited for him to say, Vanessa, that is too far. That is my father. But he didn't. He just nodded. She is right, Dad, he said softly. It is time. I have already called a realtor. He specializes in distress sales. He can be here tomorrow morning. We can have the papers signed by noon." He stepped closer to me, invading my space. He smelled of stale airplane air and desperation. "Do this for me," he said. "If you ever loved me, do this. Fix the mistake of being a Blackwood. Help me be a Sinclair." I looked at him. I looked deep into his eyes, searching for the little boy who used to sit on my lap and ask me to read him stories about knights and dragons. That boy was gone. In his place stood a man who would cannibalize his own father to feed his vanity. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't pain. It wasn't sorrow. It was the snapping of a cord. The final tether that bound me to him broke. I took a deep breath. The air in my house didn't smell stale anymore. It smelled like clarity. "Get out," I said. "What?" Brandon blinked, confused. "I said, get out of my house," I repeated, my voice steady and hard. "You can't be serious," Vanessa laughed, a shrill, ugly sound. "You have no choice. We are doing you a favor." I walked over to the door and pulled it open. The night air rushed in. "I am not selling this house," I said. "And I am certainly not going to Sunny Meadows so you can pretend to be rich in New York. Pick up your $5,000 and leave." Brandon's face turned purple. "You selfish old man," he screamed. "You are going to ruin me." I pointed to the door. "You ruined yourself, Brandon. Now get out before I call the police and have you removed for trespassing." He looked at me, shocked by the steel in my voice. He had never heard me speak like that. He had only ever known the gentle janitor. He didn't know he was speaking to the last true Blackwood. "Fine," he spat. He bent down and snatched the envelope from the floor, stuffing it into his pocket. "Keep your rotting house. Die in it for all I care. But don't expect us to come to the funeral. We are leaving," Vanessa announced, grabbing her suitcase. "And don't think we are done. We will find a way. We always do." They stormed out, the heavy door slamming behind them, leaving a vibration that rattled the windows. I listened as their car engine roared to life and tires squealed against the pavement, fading into the distance. I stood alone in the hallway. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of the confrontation. I walked over to the table and picked up the brochure for Sunny Meadows. I looked at the picture of the happy seniors playing bingo. I crumpled it in my fist and threw it into the trash. They thought I was weak. They thought I was a resource to be mined and discarded. They had no idea that the game had changed. They had no idea that while they were trying to steal a shack, I was holding the keys to a kingdom. I walked to the window and looked out at the dark street. They were wolves, hungry and desperate. And wolves don't give up just because you close the door. They would circle back. They would try again. But next time I wouldn't be alone. I went to the rotary phone on the wall and lifted the receiver. I dialed a number I had memorized 40 years ago but never used. It was a number that connected directly to a private line in a high-rise office downtown. The phone rang twice. Callahan, a crisp voice, answered. "It is Augustus," I said. "Augustus Blackwood." There was a pause on the other end. A pause heavy with history. "Mr. Blackwood," the lawyer said, his tone shifting from professional to reverent. "We have been waiting for your call. Your brother left instructions." "I know," I said. "I am ready to hear them." "Very good, sir. Shall I come to you?" "No," I said, looking around my humble kitchen. "Not here. I will come to you." "And Mr. Callahan?" "Yes, sir. Prepare the paperwork. All of it. My son wants a war. I think it is time I gave him one." The morning sun had barely breached the horizon when the wolves returned. I had not slept. I was sitting in the same chair watching the dust motes dance in the shaft of light coming through the window when the front door rattled. They did not knock this time. They used the spare key I had given Brandon 10 years ago for emergencies. Apparently, his credit card debt was an emergency. Brandon stormed in, followed closely by Vanessa and a short, sweating man clutching a leather briefcase. The man smelled of cheap cologne and desperation. "Dad, wake up!" Brandon shouted, though my eyes were wide open. "This is Mr. Sneed. He has a cash offer for the house. We are signing the papers now." Mr. Sneed wiped his forehead with a handkerchief and offered a trembling hand. "Good morning, sir. I understand we are in a bit of a rush. I have the contract right here. Standard distress sale agreement. We can have the funds in escrow by noon." I looked at the paper he slid across the table. The number at the bottom was insulting. It was half of what the land was worth. "I told you last night, Brandon," I said, my voice hoarse. "I am not selling." Vanessa stepped forward. She was wearing sunglasses indoors, likely to hide the dark circles from a sleepless night of panic. She took them off, revealing eyes that were cold and hard. "You don't have a choice, Gus. We spoke to a lawyer this morning. We can file for emergency guardianship. We can tell the judge you are senile, that you are hoarding assets while living in squalor. We can force this sale, and if we do, we will put you in the state home and never visit. Not once. Or you sign this, give us the money for the apartment, and we let you keep a few thousand to rent a room somewhere." It was blackmail, pure and simple. My son was threatening to erase my freedom to save his own skin. Brandon uncapped a pen and jammed it into my hand. "Sign it. Don't make me destroy you, Dad. Please. Just sign the damn paper." My hand hovered over the paper. The tip of the pen touched the line. I looked at my son's face. He was sweating. He was terrified. But he was also cruel. Just as I was about to throw the pen across the room, there was a knock at the door. It was not the frantic pounding of my son. It was 3 sharp, precise raps, a sound of authority. Brandon jumped. "Who is that? Did you call the police?" I didn't answer. I didn't have to. The door, which was still unlocked from their intrusion, was pushed open. A man stepped into my humble, decaying living room. He seemed to suck the air out of the space. He was tall, wearing a bespoke navy suit that cost more than Mr. Sneed's car. He carried a briefcase made of Italian leather and wore a watch that glinted in the morning light. He looked like he had taken a wrong turn, on his way to a boardroom in the city loop. He scanned the room, his gray eyes passing over Brandon, Vanessa, and Mr. Sneed with the disinterest of a man brushing lint off his coat. Then his gaze landed on me. He nodded respectfully. "Mr. Augustus Blackwood?" he asked. His voice was deep, resonant, and calm. "Who are you?" Brandon barked, stepping between the stranger and me. "You can't just walk in here. We are in the middle of a private family transaction." The stranger ignored him completely. He walked past Brandon as if he were a piece of furniture and stopped in front of my chair. "I am Arthur Callahan, senior partner at Callahan Sterling and Associates. I represent the Blackwood Family Trust." The room went silent. Even the dripping faucet seemed to pause. "Blackwood Family Trust." Vanessa repeated, her voice shrinking. "What is that?" Callahan continued to look only at me. "Mr. Blackwood, I received your call last night, but I was already on my way to see you this morning. I am afraid I have grave news." He paused, letting the gravity of the moment settle. "Your brother, Titus Blackwood, Jr., passed away yesterday evening. It was a sudden cardiac event. He did not suffer." I felt a strange pang in my chest. I had not spoken to Titus in 50 years. He was the golden boy, the one who stayed, the one who embraced the cruelty of our father. I thought I would feel nothing. Instead, I felt the final severance of my past. "I am sorry to hear that," I said quietly. "Wait," Brandon interrupted, his eyes darting between me and the lawyer. "Uncle Titus, the mining guy. I thought he died years ago. You never talk about him." Callahan turned to Brandon slowly. He looked at him with an expression that was almost amused. "Mr. Augustus Blackwood has never spoken of his family because he chose a path of independence. However, biology and law are difficult to sever." Callahan placed his briefcase on the table, right on top of Mr. Sneed's cheap contract. He clicked the latches open. The sound was like a gunshot in the small room. Titus Blackwood died without a spouse or children, Callahan announced, pulling out a thick document bound in blue paper. As the sole surviving sibling and per the ironclad stipulations of the family charter established by your grandfather, the entire estate reverts to you, Augustus. Estate, Vanessa whispered. She took a step closer, her greed overpowering her caution. What kind of estate? Callahan adjusted his glasses. He looked at the document. The estate includes the Blackwood Steel Holdings, the patent portfolio for the new alloy extraction process, which is currently licensed to 3 major automotive manufacturers, and the liquid assets held in the family trust. He looked up at me. After taxes and immediate liabilities, the liquid cash value of the inheritance sits at approximately $20 million. The intellectual property and real estate holdings are valued at another $40 million, though those are less liquid. $20 million. The words hung in the air. The silence that followed was absolute. I saw Mr. Sneed, the shady realtor, quietly pick up his contract, fold it, and slide it into his pocket. He knew when he was outclassed. He backed toward the door and slipped out without a sound. But Brandon and Vanessa, their reaction was visceral. Brandon's face went slack. The color drained from his cheeks, leaving him looking like a ghost. His mouth hung open. He looked at me, then at the lawyer, then back at me. It was as if his brain was trying to rewrite the last 48 hours in real time. Vanessa let out a small, strangled sound. Her hand went to her chest. She looked at the peeling paint on the walls, then at me, the man she had called a burden 5 minutes ago. I saw the calculations running behind her eyes. I saw the numbers spinning. $20 million. You, Brandon stammered. You have $20 million, I do now. I said, my voice steady. Oh my God, Vanessa gasped. She rushed forward, shoving Brandon aside. She fell to her knees beside my chair. She grabbed my rough, calloused hand in her manicured ones. Dad. She cried, tears instantly welling up in her eyes. Oh, Dad. I am so sorry about your brother. This is tragic. Just tragic. We had no idea you were going through this loss. The transformation was sickeningly instant. The sneer was gone, replaced by a mask of grieving, daughterly affection. Brandon shook his head, waking up from his stupor. He looked at the lawyer. Wait. So my dad, he owns all of it, the steel, the money, yes, Callahan said dryly. He is the sole beneficiary. Brandon turned to me. A smile spread across his face. It was a terrified, desperate, ingratiating smile. Dad, he said, his voice trembling with excitement. Did you hear that? You're rich. We're rich, I asked, raising an eyebrow. Well, yes, Brandon laughed, a nervous, high-pitched sound. We are family, the Blackwood family, I knew it. I always knew there was something special about us. That's why I was so stressed. I just wanted us to live up to our potential. He stepped closer, reaching out to pat my shoulder, the same shoulder he had shoved yesterday. This changes everything, Dad. Forget the apartment in Manhattan. We can buy a penthouse. We can buy a whole building, and you. We can get you the best doctors. We can fix this house up. No. We can buy you a mansion right next to us. We can take care of you properly now. Vanessa was stroking my hand, nodding vigorously. Exactly, she cooed. Oh, Gus. I was just so worried about you going to that nursing home, because I thought we couldn't afford to give you the care you deserve. But now, we can hire private nurses. We can travel. You can come to the Maldives with us. We can redo the honeymoon as a family trip. It was a masterclass in gaslighting. In the span of 30 seconds, they had rewritten history. I was no longer the embarrassing janitor. I was the patriarch. I was the golden goose. Callahan watched them with open disgust. He closed his briefcase. "Mr. Blackwood," he said to me, "I need your signature on the acceptance of the executorship. Once that is done, the funds will be available to you within 24 hours." I reached for the pen. Not the cheap ballpoint Brandon had tried to force on me, but the heavy fountain pen Callahan offered. "Wait," Brandon shouted. He looked at the document. "Dad, you shouldn't sign that yet." "Why not?" I asked. "Well, it's complicated legal stuff," Brandon said, sweating again. You know you're tired. You're grieving. You shouldn't be making big financial decisions alone." He looked at Vanessa. She nodded, understanding the play immediately. "He is right, Gus," she said, her voice dripping with fake concern. "This is too much for one person to handle, especially at your age. You need help. You need someone to manage this for you. Someone young who understands the modern market." Brandon straightened his tie, trying to look like the executive he pretended to be. "Exactly. I can do it, Dad. I can manage the trust. I'll quit my job. I'll dedicate myself full-time to managing the Blackwood estate. I'll make sure the money grows. I'll protect you." "Protect me," I repeated. "Like you protected me when you tried to sell my roof out from under me 5 minutes ago." Brandon waved his hand dismissively. That was just stress. We were desperate. But we did it for you, Dad. We wanted you to be safe. But now we don't have to worry. We can be a team. The Blackwood men." He looked at me with those eyes that used to look at me with love when he was 5, but now only reflected dollar signs. "Let me help you, Dad. Sign a power of attorney. Let me handle the heavy lifting. You just relax. You've scrubbed enough floors. Let me take the burden." I looked at Callahan. The lawyer was perfectly still, waiting for my cue. He knew. He had seen the paperwork I had faxed him regarding Brandon's debts. He knew exactly who my son was. I looked at Brandon. I saw the greed vibrating off him. He didn't want to help me. He wanted to control the tap. He wanted to become the millionaire he claimed to be on stage, using my signature to do it. I smiled. It was a tired smile. "You make a good point, Brandon," I said softly. "I do." Brandon asked, hope flaring in his chest. "Yes. I am old. I don't know anything about millions of dollars. I am just a janitor, right? No. I mean, you're smart, Dad, but this is high finance," Brandon stammered. I looked at Vanessa. "And you, my dear, you think I need help?" "Absolutely," she said, squeezing my hand tight. "We are here for you. We will do whatever it takes." I nodded slowly. I tapped the table with my finger. "Very well," I said. "I need a week." "A week?" Brandon asked. "To process everything I said. To grieve my brother. To think about how best to structure the management of the estate." I looked at Callahan. "Mr. Callahan, return in 1 week. I will sign the papers then. And perhaps we can discuss a management role for my son." Brandon pumped his fist in the air. "Yes, Dad, you won't regret this. I promise. I will make us kings." Vanessa kissed my cheek. The smell of her perfume was cloying. "You are the best father-in-law in the world, Gus. I always said so." Callahan looked at me, a question in his eyes. He knew I was up to something. He nodded once, snapped his briefcase shut, and walked to the door. "1 week, Mr. Blackwood," he said. "I will have the papers ready." As he left, Brandon and Vanessa hugged each other, jumping up and down like children on Christmas morning. They were already spending the money in their heads. They were already moving into the penthouse. They didn't notice that I hadn't signed anything. They didn't notice the coldness in my eyes. They thought they had won. They thought the old janitor had finally been useful. But they didn't know that Augustus Blackwood was just getting started. And they certainly didn't know that the trap I was about to set would require bait that only their vanity couldn't resist. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind Lawyer Callahan, leaving a silence in the room that felt thicker than the humid Chicago air outside. The dust motes dancing in the morning light seemed to freeze. For a moment, nobody moved. Brandon stood near the kitchen table, his chest heaving as if he had just run a marathon. Vanessa was frozen in a posture of theatrical concern, her hand still hovering near my arm, where she had been patting me moments ago. I watched them. I watched the way their eyes darted around my crumbling living room. 5 minutes ago, this room was a symbol of my failure. It was a rotting shack that needed to be sold for scrap to save their credit scores. Now, because of a piece of paper in a briefcase, it had become the headquarters of an empire. I saw the shift happen in real time. I saw Brandon look at the water stain on the ceiling, and instead of disgust, I saw calculation. He wasn't seeing a leak anymore. He was seeing a renovation project he could fund with my money. So Brandon breathed out the word like a prayer. 20 million. Liquid. Plus the patents, Vanessa added, her voice trembling. Don't forget the patents, Gus. That is recurring revenue. That is generational wealth. They turned to me in unison. The predatory hunger in their eyes was so raw it almost made me step back. But they covered it quickly. They plastered on smiles that looked painful in their intensity. Dad, Brandon said, stepping forward. We have a lot to do. If Callahan is coming back in a week, we need to be ready. We need to set up the accounts. We need to restructure the trust. I know a guy at Goldman who handles high net worth individuals. I will call him today. He reached for his phone, his thumbs already flying over the screen. I cleared my throat. It was a soft sound, but it stopped him cold. Put the phone away, Brandon, I said. He froze. What, Dad? We have to move fast. Money like this sits still, it loses value. We need to, I said, put it away. I walked over to my armchair, the leather cracked and split, and sat down slowly. I let my bones creak. I let my hands shake just a little. I played the part they had written for me. The overwhelmed old janitor. The simple man crushed by the weight of a fortune he couldn't understand. I am tired, I whispered, looking at the photo of Beatrice on the mantel. This is too much. My brother is dead. I have not seen him in 50 years, but he is still my blood. And now this money. It feels heavy. Vanessa rushed to my side, kneeling on the dirty carpet without a second thought for her designer dress. Of course it does, Gus. It is a shock. A terrible, wonderful shock. That is why we are here. To carry the weight for you. No, I said, shaking my head. No, I need time. Time, Brandon asked, his voice tightening. How much time? I looked at him. I looked at the son who had changed his name to escape me. 1 week, I said. A week, Brandon almost shouted, then caught himself. Dad. A week is a long time in finance. Markets change. Opportunities are lost. Why wait? Just sign the power of attorney now and I can get the ball rolling while you rest. I leaned back, closing my eyes. I need to think, Brandon. I need to pray. I need to ask your mother what she would want me to do. This money, it comes from a dark place. The Blackwood name has a history. I need to be sure I am doing the right thing before I accept it. I opened one eye, just a crack. I saw the panic flare in Brandon's face. He was terrified that I would donate it. He was terrified I would reject it. Of course, Dad, he said quickly, too quickly. You take all the time you need. Pray. Meditate. Whatever you have to do, good, I said. Then it is settled. Callahan returns in 1 week. Until then, we do nothing. No calls to bankers, no real estate agents. Nothing. I stood up, feigning exhaustion. Now, if you don't mind, I would like to be alone. I have a lot to process. I moved toward the bedroom expecting them to leave, expecting them to run back to their hotel and plot their spending spree. But they didn't move. Brandon exchanged a look with Vanessa. It was a look of silent, desperate communication. If they left me alone, I might change my mind. If they left me alone, I might call someone else. If they left me alone, they lost control. We can't leave you, Vanessa said, suddenly standing up. What I asked. We can't leave you alone in this state, she said, her voice dripping with syrup. You are grieving Gus. You are in shock. You are an elderly man sitting on a fortune, living in a house with security issues. She gestured vaguely at the front door, which barely locked. It is not safe, Brandon chimed in, seizing the narrative. People talk, Dad. Sneed knows. If word gets out that you are worth $20 million, you become a target. We cannot leave you here unprotected. I am fine, I said. I have lived here for 40 years. Not as a millionaire, you haven't. Brandon argued. No. We are staying. Staying, I looked around the tiny living room. Where? Here, Brandon said firmly. We will stay here. With you. Until the paperwork is signed. Until the money is secure. We are not going to let anything happen to you. But your flight, I said, masking my satisfaction. You have tickets to New York. You have Vanessa's parents waiting. Vanessa pulled out her phone. I am canceling everything. Family comes first, Gus. You are our priority now. She dialed a number and walked into the kitchen, her voice taking on a tragic, heroic tone. Mom. Yes. No, we aren't coming. It is Gus. He is going through a health crisis. We have to stay. We have to take care of him. Yes. Indefinitely. I watched her lie. I watched her use my feigned frailty as a shield. Brandon went out to the car. He came back dragging the massive suitcases. The sound of the wheels rolling over the threshold sounded like a gavel striking a block. We will take the guest room, Brandon announced. There is no guest room, I reminded him. It is a storage room now. It is full of old newspapers and broken tools. We will make do, Vanessa said, walking back in. We will sleep on the floor if we have to. We are here for you, Gus. They began to unpack. They began to colonize my home. Vanessa opened her suitcase and started pulling out toiletries, placing her expensive creams next to my bar of Dial soap in the bathroom. Brandon took off his jacket and rolled up his sleeves, starting to clear the junk off the dining table, not to clean, but to set up his laptop. He needed a command center. I went into my bedroom and closed the door. I sat on the edge of my bed and listened. I heard them whispering in the hallway. You have to be nice to him, Brandon hissed. Don't roll your eyes. If he sees you rolling your eyes, we lose everything. I know, Vanessa snapped back. But look at this place, Brandon. It smells like mold. And the bathroom. It is disgusting. How are we going to survive a week here? We do whatever it takes, Brandon replied. It is $20 million, Vanessa. For $20 million, I will scrub the toilet with my toothbrush. Just keep him happy. Keep him calm. And for God's sake, don't let him answer the phone. We control the information flow. Got it? I smiled in the darkness. They thought they were the jailers. They thought they were securing the asset. They didn't realize they had just locked themselves in a cage with the one thing they feared most. The truth. They were going to spend the next 7 days trying to charm a man they despised. They were going to serve me tea and fluff my pillows and listen to my stories, all while greed ate them alive from the inside out. They had canceled their escape to New York to live in the squalor they hated just for a chance at the money. I lay back on the pillow Beatrice used to sleep on. I closed my eyes. Let the games begin, I whispered. I had 7 days. 7 days to test them. 7 days to see if there was any humanity left in my son, or if the rot had gone all the way to the bone. And at the end of the week, when Callahan returned, I would have my answer, and they would have their reward. Whatever it turned out to be. The next 7 days were a masterclass in psychological torture disguised as domestic bliss. My small, rotting house, which for decades had known only the quiet rhythm of a lonely man, was suddenly transformed into a stage for the worst amateur theater production in the history of Chicago. Brandon and Vanessa did not just move in. They occupied the space like an invading army that had decided to win the hearts and minds of the locals through sheer, overwhelming force. It started with the mornings. I was used to waking up at 5, making a single cup of instant coffee and eating a piece of toast while listening to the news on my crackling radio. But now my mornings began with the smell of burning butter and the clatter of expensive pans being misused. Vanessa had decided that her contribution to my well-being would be culinary. The tragedy was that Vanessa had never cooked a meal in her life. She was a woman who believed that food appeared on plates via delivery apps or waiters. On the second day, I walked into the kitchen to find her wearing a silk kimono that probably cost more than my car, battling my ancient gas stove. Smoke was billowing from a skillet I had seasoned perfectly for 20 years. She was scraping something yellow and black onto a plate. "Good morning, Gus," she chirped, her voice high and tight. "I made you a scramble. You need your protein. We need to build up your strength for everything that is coming." She placed the plate in front of me. The eggs were rubbery, laced with flecks of burnt Teflon because she had used a metal fork on the non-stick pan. I looked at it. I looked at her. Her smile was brittle, her eyes searching mine for approval, not because she cared if I enjoyed the meal, but because she needed to secure her investment. "It looks delicious, Vanessa," I lied. My voice felt heavy in my throat. "Eat up, Pop," Brandon said, walking in from the hallway. He slapped me on the back, a gesture so foreign and forceful it nearly knocked the wind out of me. He had started calling me Pop. He had never called me Pop in his life. It was a character trait he must have picked up from a movie about wholesome American families. I forced a forkful of the burnt eggs into my mouth. It tasted like ash and greed. I chewed slowly, swallowing the bile that rose in my throat. So Pop Brandon continued pouring himself coffee into my chipped mug as if it were fine china. I was thinking about the portfolio. I stayed up all night analyzing the steel sector. With the patents, we are looking at a vertical integration strategy. I think we should liquidate the low-yield bonds immediately and move into aggressive tech stocks. I have a friend at a hedge fund who can get us in on the ground floor of a new AI startup. He was talking a mile a minute using buzzwords he didn't understand, trying to dazzle the janitor with financial jargon. He didn't know that I had spent 40 years reading the Financial Times in the library on my lunch breaks. He didn't know that I knew exactly what a vertical integration strategy was, and that applying it to a legacy steel patent portfolio without securing the supply chain first was suicide. "That sounds very complicated, son," I said, playing the fool. "I just want to make sure the house is fixed. The roof leaks when it rains." Brandon laughed, a dismissive bark. "The roof." "Pop, we are going to buy you a house where the roof retracts. We are thinking big picture here. But don't you worry your head about it. That is why I am here, to handle the stress." He squeezed my shoulder again. His hand felt heavy like a shackle. The days blurred into a suffocating routine of aggressive affection. They cleaned things that didn't need cleaning, moving my piles of newspapers, rearranging my few knickknacks, criticizing the dust, while pretending to admire the rustic charm. They treated me like a toddler, guiding me to my chair, fetching me water. I didn't ask for covering me with blankets when it was 70 degrees inside. But the mask always slipped when they thought I wasn't looking. On Thursday, I shuffled down the hallway intending to use the bathroom. The door to the guest room, the storage room they had colonized, was slightly ajar. I stopped. I knew I shouldn't listen. I knew it would only hurt. But I was drawn to the sound of their real voices, the voices they hid behind the smiles. Brandon was on the phone. His voice was low but excited, vibrating with the manic energy of a gambler who has just hit the jackpot. "No, listen to me, Kyle," he was saying. "I am telling you it is a lock. 20 million cash, plus assets. I am looking at the configuration right now. I want the McLaren 720S. Matte black. Orange calipers. Yeah. No, I don't need financing. I am paying cash. Next week. As soon as the old man signs the power of attorney." I leaned against the wall, my heart a slow, painful drum in my chest. A McLaren. He was buying a supercar while eating my canned soup. Vanessa's voice cut in sharp and impatient. "Tell him we need the deposit for the penthouse on 5th Avenue by Tuesday. And make sure the realtor knows we are cash buyers. I don't want a credit check. I don't want anyone looking at our history. We are wiping the slate clean." Yeah, Brandon said into the phone. "Look, Kyle, I gotta go. I have to go play nursemaid." He is totally clueless. He thinks we are doing this out of the goodness of our hearts. It is pathetic, really. He is eating it up. He actually thinks we want to live in this dump. I heard him laugh. It was the same laugh from the wedding, the laugh that mocked my existence. "And hey," Brandon added, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "don't worry about the last name on the title. It will be Sinclair. I am changing it legally as soon as the check clears. I am not putting Blackwood on a McLaren. That name is for janitors. Sinclair is for kings." I stepped back from the door, the floorboards groaning under my weight. Inside the room, the voices stopped instantly. Dad Brandon called out, his voice instantly switching back to the fake, concerned tone. "Is that you?" I retreated to the kitchen, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I grabbed a glass of water and drank it down, trying to wash away the taste of betrayal. He came into the kitchen a moment later, smiling that shark smile. "Hey, Pop, you okay? You look a little pale." "I am fine," I said, turning my back to him so he couldn't see the rage burning in my eyes. "Just thirsty." "Let me get that for you," he insisted, taking the glass from my hand to refill it. "You sit down. You rest. We have a big week coming up." I sat. I watched him. I watched the son I had raised, the son I had loved, the son I had sacrificed everything for. He was planning to erase me. He was going to take the money, buy his toys, change his name, and leave me to rot. He didn't just hate the name Blackwood because it was poor. He hated it because it was mine. I realized then that the test was over. There was no redemption coming. There was no spark of conscience waiting to ignite. They were hollowed out by greed, filled only with the desire for things they hadn't earned. That night, lying in my bed, I listened to the house settle. I listened to them whispering in the next room, plotting their escape from my life. They thought they were waiting out the clock. They thought they were enduring 1 week of purgatory to reach paradise. They didn't know that they were actually sitting in a courtroom and the judge had just slammed the gavel down. The verdict was guilty. And the sentence was going to be total, absolute devastation. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in a week I slept soundly. I needed my rest. Tomorrow was the day. Tomorrow Callahan would return. Tomorrow the charade would end and the real show would begin. I drifted off with the image of a matte black McLaren dissolving into dust. Friday morning arrived with a sky the color of a bruised plum. The air inside my small house was thick with the humidity of the approaching storm and the even heavier weight of secrets. I sat in my usual spot by the window, nursing a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. My eyes were fixed on the hallway mirror, waiting for the first performance of the day. It did not take long. Brandon emerged from the guest room. He was not wearing the casual, comfortable clothes of a man taking a week off to care for his grieving father. He was dressed for war. He wore a charcoal suit that was cut too slim for his shoulders, a crisp white shirt, and a silk tie that shimmered under the hallway bulb. He looked like a man who was about to close a deal or sell a soul. "Going somewhere, son?" I asked, my voice rough with feigned sleepiness. Brandon jumped. He adjusted his cufflinks nervously. "Oh, hey, Pop. Yeah, I have a meeting. Just a quick one. I am meeting with a specialist, a tax attorney. I want to make sure we are set up correctly for when the funds release. You know how the IRS is. We need to be proactive." He smiled. It was a dazzling smile, the kind that worked on receptionists and waiters, but faltered under the gaze of a father who had wiped his nose for 10 years. "That sounds responsible," I said, nodding slowly. "You look very sharp for a tax attorney." "Appearance is everything," Dad Brandon said, smoothing his lapel. "You taught me that right. Dress for the job you want." I had taught him to dress for the job he had. I had taught him that a clean uniform was better than a dirty tuxedo. But he had forgotten that lesson a long time ago. He checked his watch, a heavy gold timepiece he had bought on credit. "I have to run. Vanessa is going to stay here with you. She has some ideas for the house. I will be back by lunch." He grabbed his keys and hurried out the door. He walked with a bounce in his step, a frantic energy that told me he was up to something illicit. I watched him drive away in his rental car. As soon as his taillights disappeared around the corner, I stood up and walked to the phone. I did not call the tax attorney. I called the one number Brandon thought I didn't have. I dialed the private line of Elias Thorne, a private investigator who had worked for the Blackwood family for 30 years. He was the man my brother Titus used to keep tabs on his competitors. Since Titus passed, his loyalty had transferred to me, along with the steel mills. "Thorne," I said when he answered. "He is moving." "I am on him, Mr. Blackwood." Thorne replied, his voice like gravel. "I am 3 cars back." "Where is he going?" "Heading downtown toward the Civic Center. I will update you when he stops." I hung up. I knew where he was going. I felt it in my bones. While Brandon was speeding toward his destiny, Vanessa emerged from the back room. She was wearing a cashmere sweater and yoga pants, holding a tablet like a shield. She looked around the living room, her lip curling in distaste before she composed her face into a mask of sweetness. "Good morning, Gus," she chirped. "Did Brandon leave?" "Yes," I said, sitting back down. "He went to see a tax man." "Good, good. He is taking such good care of us," Vanessa said. She walked into the kitchen and poured herself a glass of water from the tap, grimacing as she swallowed it. "So, Gus, while he is gone, I wanted to talk to you about something." She sat opposite me, placing the tablet on the table. She tapped the screen and slid it toward me. "I have been doing some research," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "about managing assets of this size. It is a lot of responsibility, Gus. It is overwhelming, really. And I have noticed you seem a little forgetful lately." "Forgetful?" I asked. "Yes. Just little things. Like yesterday you left the milk on the counter. And you keep telling stories about Beatrice that you have already told us." I looked at her. I had left the milk out because she had interrupted me to demand I find the password for the Wi-Fi. And I told stories about Beatrice because she was the only real thing in this house. "What are you getting at, Vanessa?" She reached out and patted my hand. Her palm was cold. "I am just worried, Gus. Stress triggers cognitive decline. It is a medical fact. With all this money coming in, people are going to try to take advantage of you. They are going to try to trick you. We need to protect you." She tapped the tablet again. An image of a legal document appeared. "This is a guardianship petition," she said casually, as if she were recommending a brand of toothpaste. "It is a standard procedure for high net worth families. It just means that Brandon and I would be appointed as your legal guardians. We would handle the signatures, the bank transfers, the legal headaches. You would still be the owner, of course, but we would be the The gatekeepers. I stared at the document. It wasn't a standard procedure. It was a legal shackle. If I signed this, or if they convinced a judge to sign it, I would lose the right to spend $1 of my own money. I would lose the right to choose where I lived. They could put me in Sunny Meadows and I wouldn't be able to check myself out. You think I am incompetent? I asked, my voice trembling with a mix of acting and genuine rage. No, of course not, Vanessa said quickly. Not incompetent. Just tired. You have worked hard your whole life, Gus. You scrubbed floors. You fixed pipes. Do you really want to spend your twilight years reading contracts and arguing with bankers? Let us do it. Let Brandon be the man you raised him to be. She leaned in closer, her eyes wide and pleading. Imagine the freedom, Gus. You could just paint, or garden, or sleep. We would handle the rest. We would make sure the Blackwood legacy is safe. She was selling me my own imprisonment as a vacation package. I need to think about this, I said, looking away. Of course, she said, pulling the tablet back. But don't think too long, Gus. The lawyer is coming back soon. If we don't have this in place by then, he might… Well, lawyers can be predatory. He might try to take control himself. We need to present a united front. She stood up and patted my shoulder. I am going to make some tea. You just sit there and relax. Don't worry about a thing. She walked away, humming a little tune. I waited until I heard the water running, then I pulled out my phone again. A text message had come in from Thorne. It was a photo. The photo was grainy, taken from a distance with a telephoto lens, but it was clear enough. It showed Brandon standing on the steps of the Cook County Courthouse. He was shaking hands with a man I recognized instantly. It was Reginald Sinclair, Vanessa's father. Reginald was a man who had made a small fortune in logistics and spent a large fortune pretending he was old money. He was the one who had paid for the wedding. He was the one who had cut Brandon off when the bills came due. I looked closer at the photo. Brandon was holding a file folder. He looked ecstatic. A second text came through from Thorne. Subject just filed a petition for a legal name change. He expedited the process with a judge in chambers. It is official, boss. He is no longer Brandon Blackwood. His legal name is now Brandon Sinclair. I stared at the phone. My heart hammered against my ribs. He had done it. He had actually done it. He believed that the $20 million was tied to his blood, not his name. He believed that the will simply said, my son. He thought he could have it all. He thought he could take the Blackwood money and wear the Sinclair name like a crown. He was doing it for Reginald. I knew it. Reginald had probably dangled a carrot. Maybe a partnership in his firm. Maybe a trust fund for Vanessa. Maybe just his approval. Brandon was so desperate to be accepted by these people that he was willing to erase his own identity to please them. He thought he was being clever. He thought he was playing a game of 4D chess, where he secured the inheritance from me and the status from Reginald. He didn't know he had just checkmated himself. I heard Vanessa in the kitchen talking on her phone. Her voice was low, but the thin walls of my house held no secrets. Yes, Daddy, she was saying. He did it this morning. Yes, it is done. He is a Sinclair now, just like you wanted, so the wire transfer for the penthouse deposit. You will send it. Oh, thank you, Daddy. You won't regret this. Brandon is going to be the son you always wanted. And listen, Gus is practically eating out of my hand. I have him considering a guardianship. Yes, total control. By next week, we will have the Blackwood cash and the Sinclair name. We are going to rule this city. I put the phone in my pocket. My hands were shaking not from age, but from a cold, hard fury. They were fighting a war on two fronts. Brandon was securing his flank with the Sinclairs, erasing his past to build his future. Vanessa was digging a pit for me, preparing to bury me alive under a mountain of legal paperwork so she could spend my brother's money without me asking questions. They thought I was the pawn. They thought I was the old senile king waiting to be toppled. I stood up and walked to the mirror in the hallway. I looked at my reflection. I adjusted my collar. Brandon would be home soon. He would come through that door strutting like a peacock, expecting me to applaud his business acumen. He would hide the name change papers. He would smile and call me Pop and tell me how much he loved the Blackwood legacy. And Vanessa would bring me tea and tell me I was tired and suggest I sign my freedom away. I went back to my chair and sat down. I picked up the cold cup of coffee. I drank it. It was bitter. Let them come, I thought. Let them weave their webs. Because in 48 hours, Callahan was going to walk through that door. And he was going to read a clause that Titus Blackwood, a man who hated betrayal more than he hated taxes, had inserted into the trust specifically for a moment like this. A clause that required the heir to bear the name, not the blood. The name. Brandon had traded $20 million for a pat on the head from a man who despised him. And Vanessa was plotting to govern a kingdom that had already been lost. I closed my eyes and waited for the sound of my son's car. I wanted to see his face when he walked in. I wanted to see the lie in his eyes. I wanted to remember it. Because when the hammer fell, I didn't want to feel a shred of guilt. The front door opened. "Honey, I am home," Brandon shouted, his voice booming with the false cheer of a man who thinks he just got away with the perfect crime. I opened my eyes. "Welcome home, Mr. Sinclair," I whispered to myself. "Enjoy it while it lasts." Saturday afternoon presented a rare window of opportunity born from the very vanity that was consuming my house guests. Vanessa had insisted that Brandon needed a haircut before the big meeting with the lawyer on Monday. She claimed he needed to look like a CEO if he was going to manage $20 million. They spent an hour arguing about which salon in the city was prestigious enough to touch the head of a future tycoon. While they bickered in the bathroom over Yelp reviews and appointment availability, I saw my chance. I did not use the front door. The hinges squeaked, and Brandon had ears like a bat when it came to my movements. I slipped out the back door, stepping carefully over the rotting step I had been meaning to fix for 3 years. I walked through the overgrown garden, pushing aside the lilac bushes Beatrice had planted, and crossed the alleyway. I walked 3 blocks to the public library parking lot, where a black sedan was waiting. The windows were tinted darker than midnight. I opened the back door and slid in. The air conditioning was a welcome relief from the humid heat of the day. Arthur Callahan sat on the other side of the leather seat. He did not look up from the file he was reading immediately. He finished the paragraph, closed the folder, and then extended a hand. "Mr. Blackwood," he said, "you are punctual." I shook his hand. "I have spent my life punching a clock, Arthur. Old habits." I settled into the seat as the driver pulled out onto the main road. We were not going to his office. Too risky. Brandon might have followed. We were going to a small diner on the edge of town, a place called Sally's, where the coffee was strong and the booths were high enough to hide 2 men plotting a coup. When we arrived, we took a booth in the back corner. The waitress, a woman named Marge, who had served me pie for 20 years, poured us coffee without asking and left the pot. She knew I didn't like to be disturbed, so Callahan said, stirring a single cube of sugar into his cup, "Your investigator, Mr. Thorne, sent me the file this morning. It seems your son has been busy." "He has," I said, staring into the black liquid. "He changed his name. He is legally a Sinclair now. He thinks it is a step up." Callahan let out a dry, humorless chuckle. "A Sinclair? He traded a legacy of steel and iron for a logistics company that is currently being investigated by the SEC for inflating their quarterly earnings." I looked up sharply. "You know about that. It is my job to know things, Augustus. Reginald Sinclair is bleeding money. That is why he is so desperate for your son to secure your inheritance. He needs a bailout. Your $20 million isn't going to buy a penthouse. It is going to pay off Reginald's debts." I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. It was worse than I thought. Brandon wasn't just greedy. He was a mark. He was being played by a bigger shark. That makes what we are about to do even more important, I said. Callahan opened his briefcase and pulled out a fresh document. It was printed on heavy bond paper. I have drafted the amendment to the trust as you requested, he said. It utilizes the grandfather clause from the original Blackwood Charter. It is quite elegant in its simplicity. He slid the paper toward me. I put on my reading glasses, the ones Brandon had made fun of yesterday, because they were taped at the bridge. I read the text. It was legal jargon, dense and impenetrable to the layman, but Callahan had highlighted the crucial paragraph. The beneficiary of the Augustus Blackwood Revocable Trust, herein referred to as the estate, must be a direct biological descendant of the grantor. Furthermore, said beneficiary must legally bear the surname Blackwood on all state and federal identification documents at the time the trust is executed. Any descendant who has voluntarily surrendered, altered, or legally changed their surname for any reason other than marriage shall be deemed to have disinherited themselves from the Blackwood lineage and all associated assets. I read it twice. It was a guillotine blade made of ink. It is airtight, I asked. Ironclad, Callahan confirmed. It is based on the original stipulations your father set up to prevent corporate takeovers. He wanted to ensure the company stayed in the name. Your brother Titus kept the clause active. By changing his name to Sinclair, Brandon has legally severed his own claim. He has turned himself into a stranger in the eyes of the trust. I looked at the document. This was it. This was the trap. Brandon believed that biology was enough. He believed that being my son gave him the right to plunder my life. He didn't understand that being a Blackwood was not about DNA. It was about loyalty. I took the pen Callahan offered and signed the amendment. My hand did not shake. My signature was bold and clear. Augustus Blackwood. Callahan took the paper back and notarized it with a stamp he pulled from his pocket. It is done, he said. When we meet on Monday, I will read the standard will first. I will let him believe he has won, and then I will read this. Perfect, I said. I looked at my watch. I had been gone 40 minutes. If I didn't get back soon, they would send out a search party. We drove back in silence. The weight of what I had just done settled on me. I had just disinherited my only child. A part of me, the part that remembered teaching him to catch a baseball, grieved. But the part of me that remembered the look on his face when he tried to force me into a nursing home stood firm. He had made his choice. I was just enforcing the consequences. I slipped back into the house through the kitchen door just as I heard the front door open. Brandon and Vanessa were back. Brandon's hair was trimmed and styled, costing him $100 he didn't have. He looked like $1 million, which was ironic, considering he was about to be worth $0. Dad, he called out. Where are you? I sat down quickly at the kitchen table and grabbed a newspaper, pretending I had been there all along. In here, I rasped. Brandon walked in looking energized. He was carrying a thick folder. Vanessa followed him, holding a takeout coffee cup. Hey, Pop, Brandon said, sitting down opposite me. He placed the folder on the table. It made a heavy thud. Look, I know we said we would wait until Monday for Callahan, but I was thinking, why wait? We can get ahead of the game. He opened the folder. Inside was a document titled General Durable Power of Attorney. I met with that tax guy. Brandon lied effortlessly. He said that with the estate taxes the way they are, we need to move assets into a holding company immediately, like today. If we wait until the funds clear next week, we could lose 40% to the government. You don't want the government taking your money, do you, Dad? He knew my buttons. He knew I hated waste. 40%, I asked, feigning shock. It is robbery, Brandon said, shaking his head. But if you sign this, I can open the shelter accounts today. I can protect the money before the IRS even knows it exists. He pushed the document toward me. He pushed a pen into my hand. It was a Mont Blanc. He must have bought it with the haircut. Just sign right there on the bottom line, he said, pointing. I looked at the document. I knew what it was. It wasn't about taxes. It gave him total control. If I signed this, he could empty my bank accounts, sell my house, and commit me to an asylum before dinner. He wouldn't need to wait for Monday. He wouldn't need to wait for the inheritance. He would have power over me now. I looked at his face. He was sweating. His eyes were wide, dilated with greed. He was so close he could taste it. My hands started to tremble. I let the tremor travel up my arm. I let the pen rattle against the paper. I don't know, Brandon, I stammered. My eyes are blurry. I can't read the fine print. You don't need to read it, Dad, he said, his voice tight. I read it. It is standard stuff. Just boilerplate. Trust me. I am your son, trust me. The words hung in the air like toxic smoke. I gripped the pen harder. I lowered the tip to the paper. Brandon leaned in, holding his breath. Vanessa stopped drinking her coffee, her eyes fixed on the ink. I started to sign. I wrote the letter A. Then my hand jerked violently. I dragged the pen across the page, creating a jagged, ugly scar of ink. I let the pen slip from my fingers. Oh, damn it, I whispered, clutching my wrist. My arthritis. It is flaring up. I can't control it. Brandon looked at the signature line. It was a mess. It looked like a child had scribbled on it. But there was a mark. There was an intention. It is okay, Dad, he said quickly, snatching the paper away before I could protest. It is okay. An X works. A mark works. As long as there is intent, I can get it notarized. I have a friend. He didn't care that it wasn't a signature. He didn't care that it wouldn't hold up in a court of law if anyone looked closely. He just wanted the paper. He wanted the illusion of control. He was so arrogant, so convinced of his own genius, that he thought a scribble from a senile old man was the key to the kingdom. He closed the folder and hugged it to his chest. You did good, Pop, he said, standing up. You did really good. You just saved the family millions. He looked at Vanessa. We are in business. Vanessa smiled. It was a terrifying smile. Why don't you go lie down, Gus? You look exhausted. We will handle everything from here. I nodded, cradling my fake injured wrist. Yes, I think I will lie down. I walked to my bedroom, moving with the slow shuffling gait of the defeated. I closed the door. I heard them high-fiving in the kitchen. I heard Brandon say, "We got him. We totally got him." I sat on my bed and looked at my hand, the hand that had just signed a meaningless scribble, the hand that had just baited the trap. They thought they had the power of attorney. They thought they could move the money before Monday. But they couldn't. Because the money wasn't mine yet. The trust didn't transfer until Callahan executed the will on Monday morning. The document Brandon held was worthless until then. It was a blank check drawn on an empty account. But it would keep them busy. It would keep them distracted. It would make them feel safe. And while they spent the weekend celebrating their victory, fantasizing about spending money they didn't have, I would be waiting. I would be waiting for Monday morning. I would be waiting for the moment when the name Sinclair became the most expensive word in the English language. Monday morning arrived with a sky the color of a fresh bruise. It was the kind of gray, heavy day that usually signals a storm in Chicago, but inside the Lincoln Town Car Brandon had hired to drive us downtown, the atmosphere was electric with artificial sunshine. My son sat across from me, his knee bouncing with a manic, rhythmic energy that shook the leather seat. He was wearing a navy blue suit that I knew because I had seen the receipt in the trash cost $4,000. It was Italian silk, tailored to within an inch of its life, designed to make him look like a master of the universe. Instead, to my eyes, it just made him look like a child playing dress-up in his father's closet. Next to him sat Vanessa. She was dressed in a cream-colored power suit with gold buttons, a matching hat perched on her head like a crown. She held a new Hermes bag on her lap, clutching it so tightly her knuckles were white. I knew for a fact that bag had been purchased on Saturday using a high-interest payday loan she had secured online. They were drowning in debt, suffocating under the weight of their own expectations. Yet here they were, grinning like hyenas at a kill. "You look nervous," Pop Brandon said, flashing his veneers at me. "Don't be. This is just a formality. We walk in, we sign the papers, we walk out. Then we go to lunch at Le Bernardin. I already made a reservation. Champagne is on ice." I smoothed the fabric of my old charcoal suit. It was the same one I had worn to the wedding, the same one they had mocked. I had cleaned it, pressed it, and worn it like armor. "I am not nervous, Brandon," I said quietly. "I am just ready for this to be over." Vanessa patted my knee. Her touch was patronizing. "Oh, Gus, it is just beginning. Your new life starts today. No more worrying about bills, no more leaky roofs. We are going to take such good care of you." I looked out the tinted window as the city skyline rose up around us. They didn't want to take care of me. They wanted to bury me under paperwork and sedation. They wanted the Gus problem solved so the Sinclair dynasty could begin. The car pulled up to the curb in front of the Blackwood building. It was a skyscraper of steel and glass, a monument to the industry my family had built and I had abandoned. Brandon looked up at it, his eyes wide with greed. He didn't see the history. He didn't see the blood and sweat that went into those girders. He just seen a giant ATM machine. We took the private elevator to the penthouse suite. The doors slid open to reveal a reception area that smelled of mahogany old paper and quiet power. A receptionist who looked like she cost more per hour than I used to make in a week ushered us into the main conference room. It was a cavernous space dominated by a long table carved from a single slab of black walnut. At the head of the table sat Arthur Callahan. He did not stand when we entered. He sat like a judge on a bench, his hands folded over a thick leather binder. Behind him, through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Lake Michigan churned gray and restless. Mr. Blackwood Callahan said, his voice deep and devoid of warmth. "Please take a seat." Brandon strode forward, pulling out a chair for Vanessa before sitting down himself. He moved with an arrogance that made my teeth ache. He placed his elbows on the table and tented his fingers, mimicking the posture of the billionaires he idolized. "Good morning, Arthur," Brandon said, using the lawyer's first name with unearned familiarity. "We are ready to proceed. I have the power of attorney documents right here if you need to review them again." He tapped the breast pocket of his jacket, where the scribble-stained paper resided. Callahan looked at him over the rim of his spectacles. His expression was unreadable, a mask of professional indifference. "That will not be necessary, Mr. Sinclair," Callahan said. He paused on the name, letting it hang in the air for a fraction of a second. "We are here to execute the last will and testament of Titus Blackwood, Jr. and to activate the provisions of the Blackwood Family Trust. The power of attorney you hold concerns Augustus's personal affairs. The trust is a separate entity entirely." Brandon waved a hand dismissively. Sure. Technicalities. Let's just get to the numbers. My father is tired. We want to get him home to rest." Callahan opened the binder. The sound of the leather creaking echoed in the silent room. "Very well," Callahan said. He began to read. "I, Titus Blackwood, Jr., being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament. I revoke all prior wills and codicils." The legal language washed over the room, dense and impenetrable. Brandon drummed his fingers on the table, impatient. Vanessa checked her watch. They were bored by the process. They just wanted the payout. Callahan continued, his voice a steady drone. Article 4. The assets. The estate consists of the following liquid and illiquid holdings: the patent portfolio for the Blackwood alloy extraction method, valued at current market rates at $42 million. Vanessa gasped. Her hand flew to her mouth. Brandon stopped drumming his fingers. He sat up straighter, his eyes bulging. 42, he whispered. You said 40 total. Callahan ignored him. Real estate holdings in Chicago, Aspen, and London valued collectively at $18 million. And the primary investment account holding cash and securities totaling $21,400,000. Brandon looked like he was having a religious experience. He was doing the math in his head. $80 million. It was more than he had dreamed. It was enough to buy the Sinclairs, buy the penthouse, buy the McLaren, and still have enough left over to burn. He looked at me. His face was flushed with victory. Dad, he mouthed. Oh my God. I stared back at him. I did not smile. I did not blink. I looked at the son who had sold his soul for a suit and a name change. I looked at the emptiness where his character should have been. Callahan turned a page. The paper rasped loudly. Article 5. The beneficiary. The room went deathly still. This was it. The moment of transfer. Brandon leaned forward, his whole body tensed, ready to catch the gold coins raining from the sky. Vanessa held her breath, her eyes locked on the lawyer's lips. Pursuant to the stipulations of the Blackwood family charter, dating back to the founding of this firm in 1922, the entirety of the estate creates a single, indivisible trust. The sole beneficiary of this trust shall be the direct male heir of the Blackwood line. Brandon slammed his hand on the table. Yes, that is us. That is me and Dad. Okay. Arthur cut the chase. Where do we sign? When does the wire hit? Callahan stopped reading. He looked up. He took off his glasses and placed them on the document. He looked at Brandon with eyes that were cold as the steel my family forged. Please let me finish, sir, Callahan said softly. The conditions of the trust are specific, and they are non-negotiable. Conditions. Vanessa asked, her voice sharp. What conditions? Callahan put his glasses back on. He looked down at the paper. The beneficiary must meet 2 criteria. First, they must be of the Blackwood bloodline. Second, and most importantly, to preserve the legacy and honor of the family. He paused. He looked directly at Brandon. The beneficiary must legally bear the surname Blackwood on all state and federal identification at the moment the trust is executed. The silence that followed was not peaceful. It was the silence of a vacuum of all the oxygen being sucked out of the room in a single violent instant. Brandon froze. His smile faltered, twitching at the corners. He looked at the lawyer, waiting for the punchline, waiting for the laugh. What he whispered. Callahan repeated the line slower this time, enunciating every syllable. The beneficiary must legally bear the surname Blackwood. Any descendant who has voluntarily surrendered, altered, or changed their surname for any reason other than marriage shall be deemed to have disinherited themselves from the lineage. Brandon's face went gray. The blood drained out of him so fast I thought he might faint. He looked at Vanessa. She was staring at him, her eyes wide with a dawning, horrific realization. But, Brandon stammered, but that is archaic. That is just words. I am his son. I am sitting right here. Callahan reached into a side folder. He pulled out a newspaper clipping. It was the legal notice from the Chicago Tribune printed on Friday. Brandon Sinclair Callahan read, Petition for name change granted. He slid the clipping across the table. It stopped right in front of Brandon's hands. As of Friday morning, Mr. Sinclair, you cease to be a Blackwood in the eyes of the law, and therefore in the eyes of this trust. Brandon stood up so fast, his chair tipped over backward, crashing onto the floor. No, he screamed. That is a technicality. You can't do this. I did that for business. It doesn't mean anything. I am still his son, Dad. Tell him, it doesn't matter. He turned to me, his eyes wild, pleading, desperate. Dad, tell him. It is just a name. It is just a stupid name. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had stood on a stage 3 days ago and told 300 people that my name was a chain around his neck. I looked at the man who had called my history dirt. I stood up slowly. I buttoned my jacket. You are right, Brandon, I said, my voice filling the room. It is just a name. But it was the name you hated. It was the name you were ashamed of. I walked over to the window and looked out at the city. You wanted to be a Sinclair, I said without turning around. You wanted to escape the janitor's name. Well, son, you got your wish. You are free. The sound of Vanessa's scream was the only thing that broke the silence as the reality of their ruin came crashing down. The scream that tore from Vanessa's throat was primal, a sound of pure, unadulterated financial agony that shattered the dignified silence of the high-rise office. She lunged across the table, her manicured nails clawing at the lapels of Brandon's $4,000 suit. You idiot! She shrieked, shaking him violently. You absolute moron! You told me you fixed it. You told me the name change was a power move. You told me it was the key to my father's approval. Brandon shoved her away, his face a mask of panic and sweat. He scrambled backward, his chair skittering across the floor until his back hit the cold glass of the floor-to-ceiling window. He looked trapped between the drop to the street below and the truth in the room. Dad! He gasped, pointing a shaking finger at Callahan. Tell him to stop. This is a joke, right? This is some kind of sick lesson you are teaching me because I didn't visit enough. Okay, I get it. Lesson learned. Ha ha, very funny. Now tell him to sign the papers. I remained standing by the window, my back to the view of the city I had spent my life cleaning. I looked at my son. I looked at the man who had spent a lifetime embarrassed by the dirt under my fingernails. It is not a joke, Brandon, I said, my voice steady and low. It is the law, and it is the legacy. You stood on a stage in front of 300 people and declared the Blackwood name was garbage. You said it was a stain. You said you were washing yourself clean of it. I didn't know, Brandon screamed, his voice cracking like a teenager's. I didn't know about the money. If I had known we were worth $80 million, do you think I would have changed my name to Sinclair? I would have tattooed Blackwood on my forehead. I felt a wave of nausea. That was the truth, finally. It wasn't about dignity. It wasn't about identity. It was always only about the price tag. That is exactly the point, I said. You only want the name now because it has a $sign attached to it. My brother Titus knew there would be vultures. He knew that if the money ever came to light, people who despised us would suddenly claim to love us. That clause exists to protect the family from parasites. And you, my son, just proved why it was necessary. But I am your son, Brandon yelled, slamming his fist against the walnut table. Blood is thicker than ink. That trust fund is my birthright. Callahan cleared his throat. The sound was dry and dismissive. Actually, Mr. Sinclair, under the specific terms of the charter, blood is a prerequisite, not a guarantee. The legal definition of the heir requires continuity of identity. By legally petitioning the court to sever your connection to the Blackwood nomenclature, you have legally declared yourself a stranger to the estate. Brandon fumbled in his pocket. His hands were shaking so badly, he dropped his wallet twice before retrieving a sleek plastic card. He threw it onto the table. It slid across the polished wood and came to a rest in front of me. It was a temporary state ID. The ink was still fresh. It had his photo, his date of birth, and there, in bold black letters, was his new reality. Brandon Sinclair. Look at it, Brandon shouted. It is just plastic. I can change it back. I will go to the courthouse right now. I will file an emergency petition. I will be Brandon Blackwood again by noon. Just hold the papers. Just wait 3 hours. I picked up the ID card. It felt light. Cheap. It is too late, I said. Why? Vanessa wailed from the floor where she had collapsed in a heap of Chanel fabric and tears. Why is it too late? Just wait for him. Callahan tapped the document with his fountain pen. Because the trust executes upon the reading of the will, he explained calmly. The moment I opened this binder, the timestamp was set. The beneficiary eligibility is determined at this precise second. Not 3 hours from now. Right now. And right now, the only person in this room named Blackwood is Augustus. Brandon looked at me. His eyes were wide, filled with a horror that was almost pitying in its intensity. Dad, he whispered, you can't do this. If I don't get this money. Dad, you don't understand. The debt, the wedding, the honeymoon, the car I ordered. Reginald, Vanessa's dad, he leveraged his company based on my promise that this money was coming. If I walk out of here with nothing, they will kill me. Not literally, but they will destroy me. I will lose my job. I will lose my apartment. I will lose everything. He fell to his knees. The arrogance was gone. The master of the universe was just a beggar in a nice suit. Please, Dad, just give me a share. Give me half. Give me 10%. Just enough to pay off the Sinclairs. Just enough to save my life. I looked down at him. I remembered the day he was born. I remembered holding him, promising to protect him from the harshness of the world. I had failed. I had protected him too much. I had shielded him from the consequences of his own vanity until they had grown into monsters that were about to devour him. I reached into the inside pocket of my old jacket. I pulled out the newspaper clipping I had been carrying since Friday. I unfolded it slowly. It was a small rectangle of newsprint, gray and unassuming. I read it this morning, Brandon, I said, in the legal notices section. I began to read aloud. Notice is hereby given that Brandon James Blackwood has filed a petition to change his name to Brandon James Sinclair. Reason given. I paused. I looked him in the eye. Reason given: desire to disassociate from family history and establish a professional identity consistent with spouse's social standing. I dropped the paper. It fluttered down, landing next to his new ID. You didn't just change your name, I said softly. You put it in the public record that you were ashamed of me. You told the city of Chicago that being my son was a professional liability. Brandon lowered his head. He had no answer. There was no answer. You wanted to be a Sinclair, I said. You wanted the prestige. You wanted the country club access. You wanted to look down on people like me. Well, Brandon, you succeeded. You are a Sinclair now. And do you know what else you are? You are responsible for your own choices. I turned to Callahan. Arthur, since there is no eligible male heir bearing the Blackwood name to inherit the secondary beneficiary clause, is activated. Is it not? Yes, sir, Callahan said. Please read it. Callahan turned the page. In the event that no direct descendant qualifies, the entirety of the liquid assets and the patent portfolio shall be liquidated and placed into a charitable trust. The Augustus and Beatrice Blackwood Foundation. The sole purpose of this foundation shall be to provide full scholarships and housing assistance to the children of service workers, janitors, maids, maintenance staff who wish to pursue higher education but lack the means. Vanessa let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. You are giving it to janitors. You are giving $80 million to janitors. I smiled. It was the first genuine smile I had felt in days. Yes, I said. I am giving it to people who know the value of $1. I am giving it to people who aren't ashamed of dirt on their hands. I am giving it to the people you mock. I looked at Brandon. He was still on his knees staring at the ID card. I am not punishing you because I hate you, son, I said. I am doing this because I love you enough to let you learn. You said my name was a chain. I have broken it. You are free. You have your new name. You have your new family. Go to Reginald Sinclair. Ask him for help. He is your father now, legally speaking. Brandon looked up. His eyes were empty. Reginald is broke, Dad. He is leveraged to the hilt. He needed this money to save himself. When he finds out I have nothing, he will throw me to the wolves. Then you better learn how to run, I said. Or better yet, learn how to work. There are always openings for janitors. It is honest work. It puts food on the table. I walked past him. I walked past Vanessa, who was now weeping silently into her unpaid-for handbag. I walked to the heavy oak door. Mr. Blackwood Callahan called out. Where shall I send the final execution papers? Send them to my house, I said. The one with the leaky roof. I think I finally have enough to fix it. I opened the door. And Arthur? Yes, sir. Have security escort Mr. and Mrs. Sinclair out of the building. And make sure they don't take the pens. They have a habit of taking things that don't belong to them. I stepped out into the hallway and let the door close on the sound of their weeping. I walked to the elevator, my step lighter than it had been in 20 years. I pressed the button for the lobby. I was going home. I had a house to repair. I had a foundation to build. And for the first time in a long time, I was proud of my name. Augustus Blackwood. Janitor. Millionaire. Father. The elevator dinged. The doors opened. I stepped in, ready to start the rest of my life. The price of the name had been high, but as the doors slid shut, I knew it was worth every penny. The realization hit Brandon like a physical blow, but it did not make him humble, it made him violent. His face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He let out a guttural roar that sounded less like a man and more like a wounded animal. You set me up, he screamed, spitting the words across the polished walnut table. You knew I was going to do it, and you let me walk into a trap. He lunged. He scrambled over the table, scattering legal documents and knocking over the pitcher of water. His hands were clawed, reaching for my throat, reaching for the father he blamed for his own vanity. I did not flinch. I did not move. I watched him come. But he never reached me. Two men in dark suits emerged from the side doors, moving with the silent efficiency of professionals. One grabbed Brandon by the shoulder, the other by the waist. They slammed him back against the wall, not gently. The breath left my son in a whoosh. Stay down, sir, the guard said, his voice flat. Do not make this worse. Brandon slumped against the mahogany paneling, sliding down until he hit the floor. He looked at me with eyes full of hate. You are a monster, he hissed. You would rather give the money to strangers than your own flesh and blood. You are evil. I am not evil, Brandon, I said, my voice steady. I am just a janitor who knows how to clean up a mess. And you, son, are a mess. Vanessa stood over him. She was trembling, but not with fear. She was shaking with the fury of a woman who had bet everything on a losing horse. She kicked Brandon in the shin hard with her pointed heel. You idiot, she shrieked. You absolute moron! You told me it was a lock. You told me the name change was smart. You told me it was what my father wanted. It was what he wanted. Brandon whimpered, clutching his leg. He wanted the money, you fool, Vanessa screamed. He wanted the Blackwood steel money to bail out his failing logistics company. He does not care about your last name. He cares about the check. And now you have nothing. You have debt. You have a lease we cannot pay. You have a wedding bill that is going to bounce. You are nothing. She turned to me, her face streaked with mascara tears. Gus, please. You cannot let this happen. We are family. I am your daughter-in-law. Surely there is a provision for family support. Callahan stepped forward, holding the final document. The secondary beneficiary clause is quite clear, Mrs. Sinclair. In the absence of an eligible heir, the entirety of the estate, $20 million in liquid assets, and the patent portfolio is immediately transferred to the charitable trust established by the grantor. He placed the paper in front of me. The Augustus and Beatrice Blackwood Foundation, I read aloud. Dedicated to providing housing and education for the families of service workers, for the people who clean the floors and serve the food and drive the buses, for the people you laugh at. I picked up the heavy fountain pen. The ink flowed smoothly as I signed my name. Augustus Blackwood. It was the most expensive signature I had ever written, and it felt like freedom. It is done, I said, capping the pen. The money is gone, Brandon. It belongs to the janitors now. Brandon put his head in his hands and began to sob. It was the sound of a man who had sold his soul and realized the check had bounced. Vanessa looked at him with pure disgust, turned on her heel, and marched toward the door without looking back. Security hauled Brandon to his feet and escorted him out. I stood alone in the office with Callahan, looking out at the city I had helped build, and knowing I had finally done right by the only name that mattered. The elevator ride down from the penthouse was the longest descent of my son's life. It was a silent funeral procession for a future that never happened. I did not ride with them. I watched from the window as they exited the building. They walked out onto the street, not as the power couple of Chicago, but as two drowning people looking for a raft that had already sailed. The unraveling was not slow. It was instant and violent. It began before they even reached the curb. Brandon pulled out his phone, desperately trying to call Reginald Sinclair, trying to spin a web of lies before the truth could land. But Reginald was a man who lived by the ticker tape, and he already knew. Callahan had done his due diligence. The rejection of the inheritance was already being whispered in the right circles. They took a taxi to the Sinclair estate in Lake Forest. They thought they could beg. They thought they could plead family loyalty. They forgot that the Sinclairs did not have family loyalty, they had balance sheets. When they arrived, the iron gates were closed. They did not open. I heard later from Thorne, my investigator, exactly what happened. Chateau. Brandon stood at the gate, pressing the buzzer, screaming that he was a Sinclair now that he was one of them. Reginald walked down the driveway, flanked by two private security guards. He did not open the gate. He spoke through the bars like a warden addressing an inmate. He told Brandon that he knew about the debts. He knew that Brandon had charged the wedding, the honeymoon, and the deposit on the penthouse to cards that were now declined. He knew that Brandon had promised a $20 million injection into the Sinclair logistics firm to cover Reginald's own failing bets. "You are a fraud," Reginald told him. "You came into my house, you ate my food, and you promised me gold while your pockets were full of dust. You are not a Sinclair. You are a parasite." Vanessa tried to intervene. She tried to play the victim. She cried for her daddy. But Reginald looked at her with the cold eyes of a man who realized his investment had soured. He told her she had chosen a loser. He told her she had embarrassed the family name. He threw a suitcase over the gate. It contained her clothes. He told them to leave before he called the police for trespassing. They were homeless. They had no apartment because the lease in the city had been canceled due to lack of funds. They had no penthouse because the deposit check had bounced that morning. They had nowhere to go but a cheap motel on the outskirts of the city, the kind of place Brandon used to mock when we drove past it. But the fall was not over. The ground had not yet rushed up to meet them. The next morning, Brandon put on his $4,000 suit, which was now wrinkled and smelled of fear, and went to his office. He worked as a mid-level marketing director at a firm downtown. He thought he could salvage his career. He thought he could at least keep his paycheck. He was wrong. When he swiped his badge at the turnstile, the light turned red. It beeped a harsh, rejecting sound. A security guard, the same kind of man Brandon had ignored for years, stepped forward. He asked Brandon to wait. 5 minutes later, the head of human resources came down accompanied by 2 internal auditors. They did not take him to his office. They took him to a small windowless room off the lobby. They laid out the records. For 6 months, Brandon had been siphoning money from the marketing budget. He had created fake vendors, fake invoices, and channeled the funds into his personal account. He had stolen $45,000. He had used it to buy the engagement ring. He had used it to pay for the deposit on the venue. He had done it because he was absolutely certain the inheritance would cover it. He thought of it as a bridge loan. He thought he would pay it back before anyone noticed. But when you don't have $20 million, $45,000 is a felony. They fired him on the spot. They told him the police were on their way. He was escorted out of the building carrying a cardboard box with his stapler and a photo of him and Vanessa smiling on a boat, a photo that looked like it belonged to a different lifetime. He walked out onto the sidewalk, unemployed, homeless, and facing criminal charges for embezzlement. The name Sinclair, which he had fought so hard to get, was now plastered on the police report. It was the first time the new name was used in an official capacity. Brandon Sinclair arrested for grand larceny. And then came the final blow. The one that hurt the most because it proved that everything I had warned him about was true. Vanessa did not stand by him. She did not go to the police station to bail him out. She did not comfort him. She went to a divorce lawyer. She filed for an annulment based on fraud. She claimed he had misrepresented his financial status. She claimed he had tricked her into marriage. In her deposition, she called him a con artist. She called him a failure. She stripped him of his dignity in legal filings that became public record. The divorce was not a battle, it was an execution. She took the jewelry. She took the wedding gifts that hadn't been returned. She took the car that was in her name even though he had made the payments. She left him with nothing but his debt and his new last name. I sat in my kitchen reading the reports Thorne sent me. I saw the mugshot of my son. He looked terrified. He looked small. The arrogance was gone, scoured away by the harsh grit of reality. I did not feel joy. I did not feel vindication. I felt the deep, aching sorrow of a father who watches his child touch the stove after being told it is hot. He had to burn. There was no other way for him to learn that fire is real. I thought about calling him. I thought about bailing him out. I had the money now. I could make the charges go away. I could buy him a condo. I could fix it. But I looked at the photo of Beatrice. I remembered her voice. I remembered how we had struggled, how we had built a life on truth and hard work. If I saved him now, I would be robbing him of the only valuable thing he had left. The lesson. If I saved him, he would learn that there are no consequences. He would learn that Daddy always fixes it, and he would never become a man. He would stay a child forever, a child with a different last name but the same empty soul. So I did nothing. I let the wheels of justice turn. I let the consequences arrive. Brandon sat in a holding cell wearing a suit that was too expensive for the bench he slept on. He had no job. He had no wife. He had no home. He had no inheritance. He was finally a self-made man. He had made this disaster all by himself. And as the sun set over the house that he had tried to sell out from under me, I signed the first check for the foundation. It was for a scholarship. It went to the daughter of a janitor in the South Side who wanted to be a doctor. The money was doing good work, and somewhere in a cold cell, my son was doing the hardest work of his life. He was facing himself. 6 months have passed since the doors of the law office closed on my son's screaming face. I am sitting in the library of the Blackwood estate, a room with ceilings so high they seem to catch the clouds. The walls are lined with books my brother Titus never read, books bought by the yard to impress people he didn't like. I live here now. But I am not the owner of the fortune. I gave the money away, every single cent of the $20 million, to the foundation. The trust grants me lifetime residency in the family home, a modest stipend for food and utilities, and the role of chairman of the board. In a way, I am still a janitor. I take care of the house. I keep the grounds tidy. I fix the leaky faucets myself because I enjoy the work. But my most important job happens at this desk. I look down at the stack of papers in front of me. They are not legal threats or bankruptcy filings. They are scholarship applications. I pick up the one on top. It is from a young woman named Maria. Her mother is a housekeeper at the very hotel where Brandon held his wedding. Maria wants to study structural engineering. In her essay, she wrote that she is proud of her mother's calloused hands because they built the foundation of her life. I smile. It is a genuine smile, one that reaches my eyes. This girl, a stranger, understands the lesson that my own flesh and blood spent 30 years rejecting. She understands that dignity is not found in a title or a bank account, but in the honest sweat of a day's work. I dip the heavy fountain pen into the inkwell. I sign the approval letter, Augustus Blackwood. The signature flows smoothly across the page. It feels heavy, significant. For 50 years, I hid this name. Now I use it to open doors for people who have been locked out their entire lives. The silence of the library is broken by the harsh buzz of my cell phone on the mahogany desk. I look at the screen. The caller ID displays a number from the Cook County Correctional Facility. It is Brandon. Or rather, it is inmate number 8940. He calls once a week. At first he called to scream, then he called to beg. Now he calls to blame. He wants money for the commissary. He wants me to hire a better appeals lawyer. He wants me to fix the mess he made. He wants me to be the father who shielded him from the world. My hand hovers over the device. I can picture him in the common room wearing a jumpsuit that scratches his skin, holding the receiver with desperation in his eyes. A part of me, the part that remembers teaching him to tie his shoes, wants to answer. It wants to tell him it will be okay. But I pull my hand back. If I answer, I am telling him that I am still his safety net. If I answer, I am robbing him of the consequences that are currently shaping his soul. He needs the silence. He needs to sit in that cell with nothing but his new name and his old mistakes. I press the button to disconnect the call. The buzzing stops. The room returns to its peaceful stillness. I stand up and walk to the French doors that open onto the terrace. Outside, the garden is in full bloom. I planted lilies along the walkway, Beatrice's favorite flower. The sun is setting, casting long, golden shadows across the lawn that my grandfather bought with steel and blood, and that I have redeemed with charity. I take a deep breath. The air smells of rain and freshly cut grass. I feel a profound sense of calm settle over me. People in town look at me with pity when they see me at the grocery store. They whisper about the tragedy of the Blackwood family. They think I am a lonely old man who lost his only child to greed and prison. They are wrong. I press my hand against the cool glass, watching the light fade from the sky. I did not lose a son. My son died the moment he stood on a stage and decided my love was a source of shame. I only lost a stranger who happened to share my blood. And in his place I found 1,000 children like Maria children who will carry the true legacy of this family forward. I turn back to the desk, pick up the pen, and reach for the next application. The work continues. And for the first time in my life, I am exactly where I am meant to be. My story stands as a testament that a name does not define a man's worth. His character does. Brandon believed that erasing his history would secure his future, but he only succeeded in erasing his inheritance. He chased the illusion of prestige and lost the reality of love. True nobility is not found in a title or a bank account, but in the dignity of honest labor and the loyalty to one's roots. Greed may promise the world, but it always charges a price you cannot afford. In the end, integrity is the only legacy that truly lasts. If you believe that loyalty is worth more than gold, hit the like button and subscribe for more stories of justice. What would you have done if you were in my shoes? Let me know in the comments below.